Well, hi everybody. Now, what I wanted to talk about is the current stock market potential Black Monday or Black Thursday. It could even be, because some people say the whole thing could unravel on Thursday, but this is Monday morning, and in the Asia, there's already been huge drops, the highest in the Hang Seng in Hong Kong of 10%. This is all in response to Trump's tariffs. Now, what does it have to do with the recent blogs I've been doing? Well, I talked about Neptune conjunct the North Node, Saturn conjunct the North Node, which is happening right now. Now, those two haven't happened together on the North Node, but previously, when Neptune was on the North Node, we have the 2008 market meltdown, stroke economic kind of unraveling, the collapse, the banking crisis. And previously, when we both had Neptune and Saturn conjunct the North Node, not in the same month or the same week like we have now, but in the same year, we had 1991, the beginnings of the fall of communism, the fall of the Soviet Union. So there was a big reset in both world politics with the end of the Cold War and world economics with the collapse of what was generally seen then as communism. We also had the formulation of the European Union, very key actually to neoliberal economics taking off, which is what we see now unraveling. Now, basically, I can see the logic with the Trump tariffs. If these other countries are charging America tariffs, then a retaliatory tariff doesn't seem like a bad thing. But we ask, why are we in a situation where America doesn't really charge tariffs, but other developing or so-called developing, now pretty developed, like India and China, and Singapore, etc., don't charge tariffs? Well, wasn't one of the premises of neoliberal economics, were they going to shift all production, like Maggie Thatcher Reagan? They shifted all the production, the ship making, steel making, coal mining, they shipped it off to other countries because it was cheaper. The labor was cheaper in those countries. It was cheaper to get rid of whole industries and relocate them. But you couldn't have done that if there were tariffs, because re-importing that in would have mean tariffs. So it was useful not to have, be placing tariffs on those countries' imports, because you were sending the stuff out to be manufactured for that very reason. But now Donald Trump's realizing, well, I don't know, Trump's always been in that frame of mind, but I think a lot of people are realizing that you have too much specialization in each country, like in the UK, specializing so much on the City of London financial services at the expense of other areas of the economy, particularly manufacturing, may not be good for countries long term, may leave you vulnerable. Remember during COVID, when they said most of the world's pharmaceuticals were manufactured in India, you leave yourself vulnerable. And in particularly when you have the rising BRICS nations, the kind of aggro with Russia, etc., and Russia being a big ally of China, looking down the line, a lot of people will say, right, we don't want to be too dependent on all our imports from these countries. Perhaps tariffs are a good idea, not only to reduce the trade deficits, but in order to and rebalance economies and introduce manufacturing. But the thing is, manufacturing can't spring up overnight. You don't just plant it, a seed in April, and you get a plant in June. Do companies want to relocate manufacturing to the USA when they might have a kind of Kamala Harris person in 4 years' time when Trump's not there? Is it a good long-term goal? So I ask whether this can actually achieve strengthening US manufacturing. Will it protect US industries, or will it just lead to a detrimental trade war with China? Now, a lot of people have said as well, the sanctions against Russia were a very bad idea because Russia simply was banned from the SWIFT payment system. So they had to set up other ways of doing business. They're doing more business with India and the BRICS countries. That means India have access to cheap Russian oil and gas. Europe don't. So it strengthened the Indian economy. So sanctions against Russia have strengthened BRICS. They're saying, will these tariffs end up strengthening BRICS as well as China moves its trade more with other countries? But America is still an enormous and an important and an innovative market, right? So maybe they can have some positive effect. I do think what we're looking at is a big reset in terms of the fall of neoliberal economics. So we say, well, people have said European Union have tariffs on American goods, so why shouldn't America have tariffs? Yes, the European Union has to have tariffs because they have to make it worthwhile to be in the EU. If they weren't going to have tariffs with America, then America has as much benefit as an EU country, so they need to have a trading bloc where there's a kind of a advantage to join it, right? So astrologically speaking, this week was going to be big. I mentioned that it's a pivotal time with the Neptune super conjunction, Neptune being in Aries, but with being conjunct Saturn, North Node, Mercury retrograde, and Venus retrograde, all in Pisces. But could it all go pear-shaped? Now, Mercury goes direct today, but there's still this conjunction of planets right at the end of Pisces and conjuncting Neptune, which is just getting into Aries, which is also a pivotal point in history. Neptune in Aries is known as being quite explosive. It's very dynamic. It causes a whole reset. So what we're seeing now is kind of a beginnings of a financial reset. Now, to cover a second point linked to this, the real event is not going to happen in the stock market. Yes, the huge falls could enable big investors with a lot of liquidity to buy up cheap stocks, namely BlackRock. So it could help the whole BlackRock, Vanguard sort of syndicate to buy up a lot of stocks. And it could have been done, a pump and dump done for that very, very reason, to spook the smaller investors and scoop up more power to BlackRock. That's one possibility. The other possibility is it's going to lead to a big decrease in liquidity. I mean, stocks falling by definition means people have less confidence in dividends, means firms could be less profitable because of all these tariffs. It means there's greater uncertainty. All this leads to lower liquidity, and there could be a liquidity crisis, which will impact the bond market. And that's the big enchilada. Where's the bond market going to go? Now, because interest rates were quite high 40 years ago, there was a lot of scope for them to be lowered in order for the quantitative easing to keep happening. But we are really at rock bottom in terms of interest rates now. The only way is up, and that is going to mean the end of QE. So while they could use a huge amount of QE to avert crises that came up in 2008 during COVID, which was obviously engineered, the ability of sovereign debt, and particularly with the UK, to borrow more and more is decreasing over time. And the more governments have to pay higher and higher interest rates, the more that ability to borrow and to fuel the economy through increasing money printing is going to decline. And as that declines, that means there's a heavier tax burden, which is always going to go on the middle class. And that's why I want to mention this guy, Gary, from Gary's Economics, who's everywhere at the moment. You know what David Icke says? When someone's nowhere and they're everywhere, just ask questions. So he's got a big YouTube following, which we know can be heavily manipulated through bots. Anyone they like Russell Brand, who's pushing a narrative, has a great YouTube following. Otherwise you get thrown off. And then he's invited on Question Time, and it's like really kind of trying to be cool and kind of, I don't know, like some Cockney, I don't know, man of the people. And he's there on, I'm sure you've seen him because he's been heavily amplified by the media, like Martin Lewis and other people have been. And he's there on Question Time. Oh, tax the rich, tax the rich. Now, this is so emotive for people. They tap into it because a lot of people have animosity towards the rich. Maybe they don't trust them for many reasons. They associate the rich with kind of Bill Gates and those kind of people. And they quite rightly think, oh, and they are rather eager for those sort of people to be taxed. But taxing the rich in terms of what he's talking about, even at 1%, would only raise about 15 billion, which is nothing. I mean, the government burns through that in about 10 days. I mean, when it comes to Ukraine and all the spending, they're burning through cash. Taxing the rich, even if it made any difference, is only going to raise a very, very small proportion of money. And when they're talking about taxing the rich, they don't mention billionaires. They sit above it. They benefit from taxation because a lot of billionaires earn vast amounts of their wealth through government contracts. There's also a big problem with cronyism, as we saw typified in COVID, where government ministers were getting vast amounts of money and making millions through contracts for masking and Nightingale hospitals and that kind of thing. I remember them saying that Trump's election in 2016, that Trump's entire net worth of $6 billion is the equivalent of what Elon Musk has had in government contracts. We know Peter Thiel of Palantir getting huge amounts in government contracts. So when they're talking about raising taxes, the governments are going to divert that money to billionaires, and they don't pay tax because they diversified across the world. They've got so many ways to hide assets and to move their assets around and take advantage of schemes that they are actually beneficiaries of taxes. So higher taxes are going to penalize the middle class. And what have we said in communism? They always want to destroy the middle class because then they get rid of any opposition. The government and the billionaires are all in one big club. It's the middle class that can be a potential threat. Part 2 on the way.